joining us for, holding space. So this is our new series where we pick the most compelling art spaces that we can and scan them with the Matterport and allow people to not only see these virtual spaces. Essence, do you just want to say a couple words to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Essence Harden. I'm from Oakland, California, and I live here in Los Angeles. I write about art, across various publications and art catalogs for exhibitions, but I am mostly an independent curator. And so the exhibition at Sites of Memory was my most recent exhibition.
And it was wonderful. It was a very, very nice kind of expansive view of, obviously the show is named after the Toni Morrison essay, and it kind of talks about how the kind of how we expand our thinking and think of the future and how we imagine is also rooted in things that we've been through and kind of like, our sites of memory. Can you explain a little bit about kind of like how you settled upon that as a title and a theme, and kind of how that helped you build this kind of show? So Essence, Sites of Memory represents the Toni Morrison essay, which in my interpretation kind of talks about kind of how we expand our thinking and how we think about the future is also rooted in the past and our memories. And so they're kind of intertwined. How did that, if that's a good explanation, let me know. And then kind of how did you use that as a starting off point to create the show?
I was interested overall in sort of how memory can operate as a strategy for like desire. So less about the ways that we actually remember, but more in that there's a want to remember, and that in and of itself is sort of an exploration for these group of artists. That in that desire to capture the past, um, affect ephemeral moments, right? That they're creating these sort of bodies of work around that desire. So it is memory in the degree that memory is like a jumping off point for a mood, for a want, for a desire. And the exhibition kind of uses Toni Morrison's essay because I love Toni Morrison and I love the way that she thinks about a zillion things. But this sort of way that she's kind of thinking through her own work and neo-slave narratives and how that genre um, is trying to think through sort of fact or fiction, right? And that like she's interested in truth telling, and in that truth telling, you get maybe facts that are stranger than fiction. But it was that sort of want, that desire, that entanglement of a past that can't necessarily be attached to the historical record all the time, that kind of evades history to some degree, in these artists. And so like, how do you kind of take all of this fleeting, passing moments, this want for something that you can't quite grasp, and actually create art out of it, and have an exhibition ultimately that explores that across different genres and mediums. And there's Pamela Council's installation for its own kind of grand sensory
And we'll get
element
to that.
around that memory. But then we have the sort of main space, the main large gallery where most artists are, outside of Anique Jordan, who's in her own space as well, kind of through that process, thinking through family, thinking through the historical record, the archive, Black possibilities, representation to some degree, diaspora, longing, all of those things.
Sure. I think that being a black artist or being a black curator at this time must be very, is you're constantly grappling kind of with your own experience of what's going on, but also a lot of what we're seeing is so not new. When I look at a piece like this that, obviously is not from today, but like seems like it's very close to what's going on right now. Well, could you first of all just talk a little bit about this piece?
Sure, that's Noel W. Anderson. The piece is called Diluting. And what the image is from 1970. It's a Black Panther Party members who were present in Philadelphia. And so they've been like rounded up in the evening, or like maybe it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, which is why everyone's in like their underwear,
Hmm.
by cops in Philadelphia. And so Noel's work, which when I was thinking of sort of what are the kind of grounding elements within the exhibition, this piece of Noel's was something that I really had in mind, because Noel's dealing with the kind of impossibilities of Black representation. and the historical memory that tries to manipulate the image. And so Noel takes an image that's, a public record, manipulates it himself, and then it gets woven on these jacquard weavings. And this piece is pretty large. I can't quite remember the dimensions, but they're massive. They're like
Yeah,
the
it's almost the
dreams.
entire wall.
It's certainly, and it's stretched.
It's
And
life
it's
size, basically.
Yeah, and the jacquard weaving, because it's a textile technique that is layered, that when you're actually up and close with the image that's already manipulated, and kind of waving effect that we have that Noel gives us, there's also the distress that happens within the textile itself. These pieces for Noel live. So, they get adjusted, they get updated, either with direct sort of manipulation by his hand, kind of pulling at sections, creating like holes or spots where the color kind of enters the field of black and white, or just over time, the kind of duress that happens to the textile. And in that, I think you get a really interesting narrative of what I was talking about earlier, right? That kind of the strategy for desires to contain things that are moving. And I think for Black people, or Black men, or Black, women, Black people, broadly speaking, how do you contain our sort of image field? And I think it's something that's deeply not only manipulated, but also kind of presents us with a series of problems in the public eye outside of Blackness. And so I think Noel's work and Noel's technique with his work around photography and textile kind of gives us a structure that is distressed.
Well, yeah, it's very powerful, and it is, it kind of is a metaphor for the kind of stress and distress and manipulation a lot of us are feeling and seeing, especially now. How did you, talk a little bit about how you came to have this relationship with the artist space? I know this is your first show there, and kind of how did you approach this, not only from like the art standpoint, but kind of how to use a space like this?
Yeah, I mean, I know Arthur Lewis through. I mean, since my first exhibition, which was in 2017, Arthur and Hal purchased a work, and kind of since then they've come to every exhibition or most of them that I've had in Los Angeles, and have loaned work to exhibitions I've done. So I did a show at the California African American Museum that closed in 2019, and it was called Plumline, Charles White and the Contemporary, and a few of the works were actually from Arthur and Hal's collection. And so Arthur is a sort of mentor in the grand scheme of like, how does it sort of work to be a Black person in this broader community of art makers, right? I don't make art myself at this point anymore, but I'm supported deeply by the kind of impulse that Arthur presents when it comes to being a collector and a community member ultimately. And so Arthur's just a big support and a mentor that I love to have on my side.
He's a great one to have, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
right?
he let us come in here and scan this, without knowing much more about it than what we wanted to do. So we are big fans of Arthur over here as well, obviously.
Arthur's great. He's just fantastic and super supportive and open. And I think that's why I wanted to do something at the space. So when Arthur got the new position as creative director of the UTA Artist Space, we had a meeting almost immediately about, me doing something there. And then COVID came and my show got pushed, by virtue of COVID. And now here we are. It opened in February of this year and it closed in March. But yeah, I was just excited because I knew that Arthur would support me being able to kind of go balls to the walls with whatever I wanted, and had not only the sort of, energy around the idea, but also the sort of financial space to actually allow that to happen. And I think what's important about Arthur and about UTA Artist Space is that we're actually able to sort of, elevate people, artists, makers, curators, writers, right, into the field in a way that's actually substantial for them.
How working with the UTA space is not just something that's freedom, kind of liberating creatively, but also financially significant to the people who participate.
Yeah, I know that's just important when you're talking about any of these structures, you're talking about institutions, what institutional support can actually do and looks like. Because if you don't have the family background, it can be hard to do your job. And I think that Arthur respects that. And also, it really did feel like an elevation game for a lot of us. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I saw the space, and I've been to UTA a few times before my show, and it always looks different. Like they build it out however you need. There's a lot of freedom and openness there, and so I thought of, kind of dividing the gallery up a little bit here with these smaller additional walls, but really using all three gallery spaces to tell the story. And that's how I came up with it.
Well, it's very compelling. It's very kind of there's something for everyone. I think no matter what you're kind of looking for in this show. I was just at the wall of portraits, which was really interesting for me because it's all these these scenes of black family, the ones that kind of remind me of my mom's side of the family in Houston, and it also had a bunch of scenes of people celebrating and kind of being together, and in the context of what we just been going through, which is like those are the experiences that we're lacking. Can you talk a little bit about those photographs? We'll go over there again. I just wanted to give people
Yeah,
a better sense
sure.
of the room.
So I think the photograph you're talking about are Lipo Henkran. She's from South Africa. She's from like a district in Johannesburg. And the series is called Her Story. And so it's about, so Lipo's mother passed away and she got hold of not only the family archive in terms of photographs, but also her mother's wardrobe for like the last 3 years was basically still intact in her closet. And so Lipo did these kind of doubling of images of her dressed up in her mom's clothes, and then superimposed onto the original photograph. And
Wow.
so you get this kind of like eerie, ghostly effect, but also you know a grand gesture of remembrance. Um, a moment she wasn't there, a moment she was in life for, or family events she wasn't there for, but now she becomes present. And the whole series is 30 images. I believe there's 11 at UTA, if I can
Okay.
remember correctly. Maybe 10, sorry. Um, but they're just fantastic. And I think, again, it's like that offering, if we're talking about what Noel's thinking through and the kind of impossibility when it comes to imaging Blackness, then what Lipo's getting at, right, is the past and time and that kind of connection to a person that can be continuous, even in their material form not being there. And it's this very intimate look at a family structure, a very intimate look at Black life and movement, because it's a lot of the images are coming like not just from a singular place in Johannesburg, but also what does it mean to be, an indigenous person from South Africa?
Right. Yeah, I mean, this
Mm-hmm.
very kind of diasporic look at kind of our culture and people. It's funny. My mom also passed away a few years ago, and I remember having to clean out her closet myself. And I'm not someone who wears a lot of women's garments, but I certainly did put a lot of them on. And knowing that that is actually what's going on here is really it's deeply touching and meaningful. It's a really wonderful way to kind of remember someone that we have lost, but who is still yet quite vital in our experience. Um,
Yeah. And just a good use of like the field of photography for
mhm.
photography to be pushed at its boundaries, I think, right? To like really take hold of imaging in this type of way where the photograph doesn't just exist as a partial narrative, but can exist as like an affective space.
Right. Okay.
So Anique Jordan, she's based out of Toronto, and Anique has been creating an archive for the last 15 years around sort of instances of anti-Black violence within Toronto or the greater Toronto region. And Anique's point in all of this, right, is to think about how anti-Blackness is not just an enactment of something like the Klan, right? These kind of outright deaths or public fields that we can acknowledge as being racist, and particularly towards Black people, but how the insidiousness of anti-Blackness actually operates in a similar gesture. And so that if we're going to think about this sort of bearing witness, that's what this space can offer to the crimes that are happening to Black people at the very level of inadequate housing, which one of the works has. What does it mean to have an all-white city council? Like spaces and the ways that legislation, institutions are generally operating under this field of anti-Blackness, right? And so Anique's work is really, because it not only is the archive, like quite literally, like her digging through and collecting and honoring what has happened, but the kind of bearing witness that then happens in between or in relationship to her own body and the works. And so then we are forced to kind of look at these silky, deeply, non-reflective black photographs, where you do not see yourself, but you do have to see unique, and you do have to see what it means, I guess, to sort of contend with that, what the weight and the toll of something like that does.
How do you feel, given the events that I mean, the thing about this time that's so dispiriting, and I touched upon this earlier, is that a lot of the events that we're experiencing are not new. They've been going on for a very long time. But nonetheless, how do you feel that, let's say if you had done this show in 2018,
Mm.
how do you feel it would have been different? Or kind of how was the contemporary environment kind of influencing what you wanted to, put and select for this?
Hmm. I honestly don't think it would have any change or effect on what it is I show. I think by virtue of what you just said, which is like the historical arrangement of Black life in this country, the New World, globally, is one of extreme anti-Black violence. Um, in regard to like the state and white supremacy and whiteness, those things have remained true. Like my degrees in African diaspora studies and my undergraduate degrees in history. And so what I've been studying for, the last 15 years, right, is like, and longer, honestly, is Black history. And
Mhm.
so while it is quite impressive, amazing, all the dope things that it means to be a Black person, when it comes to whiteness and white supremacy, those things aren't new. And so they don't change, I think, for me, what I'm interested in visually and thinking through. Toni Morrison wrote this piece right after Beloved. So what, 1988?
Mhm.
That's a minute ago,
Yeah.
but it feels meaningful now, right? I'm constantly going back into the throes of history and the throes of the archive of Black folk talking, from today to yesterday to 40 to 100 years ago, right? Whenever I can get that record, that account, I'm going to take it. I'm going to listen. I'm going to read. I'm going to do whatever, right? So it doesn't really change for me. I think that I see it as a long project. Reckoning with the world. But I think that being a Black person is more than abjection. I think that being Black is dope. And I love people making work around a whole variety of things. And that Black people are more than white supremacy, and death and mayhem and
Right.
ridicule come face.
Well, that's a great place to get to this room, which I think kind of nods toward, I mean, this is much more about kind of like products that we use, but it also kind of is a lighter room. And it's like, I instantly entered this room and it smelled familiar, and I felt like
Yeah.
the sensory experience, if you want to explain for people kind of what they're looking at exactly, here's a good view.
Yeah, sure. So the last gallery, Gallery 3, is Pamela Counsel's installation Blaxidermy. Um, and Pamela has been making these fountains, not necessarily this fountain, but fountains for quite some time, and thinking about them as these kind of products, um, these ways of thinking through Black joy.
Hmm.
And this experience is filled with lustrous pink oil. And lustrous pink oil is like a hair product that you put in your hair to like moisturize it. Now, whatever lustrous pink oil is actually made out of, I don't know. I have a little kid, like they probably won't get lustrous pink oil in their hair, but I
Sure.
had it in my hair, especially when my hair was straight when I was little.
Hmm.
So, but the room is actually, while I guess it can feel light, it also is a fairly intense ritual process, and
Right.
that the room is around creating a safer space, for a traumatizing moment in Pamela's personal life, right? And that this kind of, like space or site for her younger self, a way to like create care and tenderness, and to slow down, and what kind of lustrous represents around like, care, tenderness, moisture, um, is the offering here. And so there's panels on the wall as well that are made, that are like sneaker soles,
Hmm.
um, and they are also part of the installation, around like, sneaker culture, and like also escape possibilities that happen when you actually have shoes on your feet. And the rugs at the bottom of the pedestals are also a piece of hair, essentially with cowrie shells on it.
Yeah.
but it's a complicated piece, and I think it's really interesting to see the ways that people have responded to it. Like I think a lot of Black folks can smell it, and they're like, this smells like something that I know deeply, and that kind of that memory tool, right? That like I think the strongest memories, whatever scientifically, are the ones that are around smell, because it like literally transports you back to a place within your mind at least. And then, when once you enter it, and there's kind of this abundance of fountains overflowing with lustrous pink oil. And if you don't know what it is, then you might not really get the point about the hair care.
Right.
But the silicone pieces, they tell a story. And the kind of the scene of trauma is like one of the silicone pieces. It's like in the room with you. The moment's there, like Pamela puts the moment within the room with you while also offering this kind of abundant flow. And I think even the formulation of the fountains, kind of like the way that they're creating the circle, it feels almost like a seance. Like there is a transference of power and a desire to kind of shift the moment of pain to something more abundant.
Well, it's definitely a very immersive and kind of sensory piece. I think that, hearing more about the intention behind all of this definitely grounds it a bit more. Are these field hockey sticks in the beginning? What are those related to kind of something else that she kind of experienced growing up as well? Because that to me, it's like that's what, having gone to schools where that was a popular sport, I'm like, very, very few people like us were engaging with that, to say the least.
Totally.
It's curious
Pamela's
to
from the
see it
East
here.
Coast. Yeah, Pamela played field hockey as a youth. So like in the moment that this like that the age at which this thing has happened to her, this is also part of like who she was, which was like a field hockey player.
Right, which is why we're on the kind of astroturf surface, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can read it like that. I'm into
it. Not to tell anyone how to interpret anything here, but for me,
No,
it was
what's great is that it's up to, that's the coolest thing about art is like I can talk through it how I'm going to talk through it. But I think what I missed while COVID was like going strong and we weren't able to go outside is like going in person to see stuff, right? To like experience it for my own kind of being. Like
Right.
that feels maybe like the strongest power that art has, and that it's really tough to only have things online. It's really hard to not experience things in person. But this feels like a pretty rich environment, this 3D
Yeah.
recreation.
I think that, in terms of the facsimiles that we're creating around in-person experiences, this was one that we thought, because it would be one thing just to kind of capture this and send people links and they can explore on their own. I think it's much richer to do it with a guide who kind of made this space and kind of birthed this space in some way. So it's really actually incredible to hear. I mean, Chad and I going around the art space ourselves and scanning everything and kind of trying to read up on things as we saw them, and then hearing you and the intention behind everything. Now another thing I wanted you to talk about, this is, in case it's not loaded on your end for whatever reason, this is a quilt that almost looks like a robe. It's bunched up in the middle. It's next to the red vest, it looks like. Did you want? Yeah.
So the quilt is Basil Kincaid and that piece. And Basil has 2 quilts in the show, and he also has 2 collages. And so Basil with the quilts is really, working through kind of, I think, as of a type of assemblage, right? Like things that have been donated to him, things that he's gotten himself, things that he's found, and creating these like kind of beautiful bodied structures out of them. And so quilting as something that has happened in his family for many generations is a skill and a practice that he's taking up, I think in part to like be a part of that genealogy, but also how that genealogy is really rooted in what I would say is an assemblage kind of theory, right? Which is that you take from what is to create a new thing.
Yeah, we're all the products of everything that's happened before.
Yeah, so that's Noel W. Anderson again, who,
on the other wall.
And so he kind of flanks the actual gallery space, and I wanted that to be true. So that image that Noel is manipulating is from the rebellion here in '92 after the Rodney King hearing or whatever decision to let those terrible cops go. And so again, it kind of has the same kind of essence that Noel was working with throughout Dai Lutang, and this one's called Hood Dreams 1. And it's a newer piece. I think it's like from 2019. But he really wanted to have this kind of, again, kind of drapery in a style, uh, reminiscent of like Sam Gilliam, right? Where like there's the structure in and of itself becomes a body. And to use that body to then think around, again, like what I would say is, the sort of the fragile place of Black imaging, and that as you kind of stretch away from the image or walk away from the image and you get up close and you get behind it, the structure that is being represented, that is being shown, gets, I think, completely twisted and turned. And so the image is less manipulated via, whatever Noel's using digitally, but it's manipulated as like as a body.
Right.
And that body is what then kind of how it exists in the structure.
Just like these bodies in the image are being manipulated by the people in them. Well, this is such a powerful show, and it really speaks a lot to kind of where we are, because I think we're in this cycle of kind of, it feels like we're reliving things that happen contemporarily, like even, hold on, I'll pause while almost on cue.
Yeah.
I live downtown in Los Angeles, so it's been a very
Okay.
vigorous and cacophonous time down here.
Okay.
But what I was saying is, like, even as we experience the shooting in Minneapolis, as we're on trial for the previous shooting, sorry. I'm moving shortly to Echo Park, which has, as we know, a lot of its own issues, but which was a whole other episode to talk about. But it will be nice not to be as near a fire station, which is right across the street. But what I was saying is, like, it's like it's being this last year and kind of seeing how we're in the cycle of the same things happening over and over, even within a very short time span. And then also kind of like the further we look back, the further, the kind of more present some of these kind of past instances and these past works by, very thoughtful Black people, they seem as resonant today, sometimes more resonant even than they might have when they were written. It's just it can be exhausting, but I think at the same time, you understand that you're also part of a legacy and kind of the roots that are so strong that it kind of even helps you prop up today. I'm not sure if I'm being extremely articulate, but there is I feel like we are, we're standing on so many people that came before us who kind of came through and survived the same things that we are going through, that there is a real solace and grounding in that, and the show really kind of makes that evident.
Oh, well, I'm glad it does. I'm glad it does something.
Because I think, because we need so many of these shows. I think it's so hard to stay propped up at times, and I think that spaces like this really do a fantastic job of that in such a multitude of ways. What can we don't have to be specific, but kind of what is interesting you kind of nowadays? Obviously, these same themes, I'm sure, are kind of evergreen in terms of the things that you'll continue to talk about. But what is on your mind, today? And what might you be looking to explore in the future?
I've just been like reading kind of, it's not a silly book actually. It's actually pretty good. It's called like Big Friendship. It's like Amina.
Oh yeah, that's my girl. I know both of them, but Amina especially. That's amazing. They're great.
Cool, yeah. It's cool. I've been reading that. I have a couple exhibitions opening this year at the end of the year that I've been working on. One's here in LA at ESMOA, the El Segundo Museum of Art, and that's in October. And that is thematically thinking of blue and blues, and it's sort of this atmospheric group show that I'm doing that I'm really excited about. I have a show at Eduardo Secchi in Florence and Milan that starts opening. It starts in November.
That'll be great. They'll both be great, but that'll be fun. Will you be able
Maybe I'll be able to go.
I know, right?
So it's like, three chapters, and that show I'm also really looking forward to. It's kind of based off of um, this like Fred Moden essay, Black Topological Experience, that I read that I'm kind of trying to like vibe with. And what else do I have? I consulted on an exhibition that's opening at the Oakland Museum of Art in Oakland, California in
Hometown.
July. Yeah, so those things are happening, and I'm just trying to go to Jamaica in July and help a friend move to New York in August, I hope, and go to New Orleans for Prospect in October. I'm hoping all these things are possible, and that's just kind of where I'm at. I'm ready to go. I've been vaccinated for a while, so I'm just kind of like
There we go.
hoping. But yeah, there's great shows here in LA that I'm super jazzed about. LACMA reopened, so that's going to be
Mm-hmm.
great for me to pop by. And my friend Kari Johnson Ricks had a show at Night Gallery that I think is still open for another
I'll
either
check that
week or a
out.
few days. Oh my God, it's so fucking good.
I
He's
can't
just a
wait.
genius.
There's
Yeah, but
that's
I
the
was
one
kind of
thing about the reopening. It's like I forgot how much I missed. I think that sometimes when you're deprived of something, when you get it back, you're like, let me consume as much of this as I can, and that's been me in art spaces. I went to
totally.
LACMA. I went to CAM the day it reopened. Actually,
Oh,
a
nice. I
friend
went to
Nikita
camp
Gale,
too.
she has a show there. Her show, which is titled
So good.
Private Dancer, I want to
So
say,
good.
because it was like the same week that the Tina documentary had dropped on HBO,
Which
which
I
was like,
also watched. Very good.
yeah, it's just funny because it's like this. Both of these things. Well, I'm not sure if the Tina documentary was delayed, but certainly Nikita's show was, and yet the synchronicity of them coming together at the very perfect time. So a lot of this stuff seems very kismet. Well, you have a
Yeah.
very exciting fall planned, Essence. I am
Yeah.
jealous.
Shit's still happening.
I hope to
I'm
be able to
supposed to.
experience some of those things that you're organizing. I mean, it does feel like, we're just going to hope for the best, but,
Me
obviously
too.
technology like this still exists. So if you need me to come to Milan and scan your show so that we can make it more accessible to the people who are
Let's do
not traveling, please let
it.
me know. Well, it's been
Okay. I'll look
phenomenal to
into it.
talk to you, Essence. Keep doing what you're doing. It's very important. It's just very nourishing, for our
Thanks. I
community, for
appreciate
these
you.
spaces to exist, and for you to be supporting all of these artists who are making such vital and important statements, and such beautiful
Hey, they're
ones at that.
supporting me, so we're all doing it together. It's like a little family over here.
Anything I
Amazing.
can do, honestly, that's all this is about, is kind of uplifting people like you in spaces like this. And so, my like far more ignorant than you perspective kind of letting me lift you up is a pleasure, and I've learned a
100%.
lot today. So
Well, I'm
take
so happy to do it.
Okay, of course. Well, take care. I'll say, say hi to Arthur if you see him before I do, and we'll talk
Well,
soon.
okay, cool. Bye.
Thanks, Essence.